What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and this video is going to be pretty special. If you don't know, I have a Patreon, link in the description down below if you want to support me directly. And if you subscribe to a certain tier of that Patreon, you get to basically suggest one video topic per month that I'll make. And this month, we had a patron suggest that I sort of compare old deck lists to modern deck lists and sort of see how they've changed and talk about that. So I thought that was a good idea. So here we are. And this list right here is the winning list from the event that Yata format is based around, the August 2003 Worlds event. And it was piloted by, and forgive me, I'm going to butcher this name. I think it's, I'm not even going to attempt it. Okay. But, I've got the name listed here. Mr. Yu Long here. And their list is very, very cool. There's a lot of interesting things going on. It's classified as hand control because it's very much leaning into those aspects. It's playing triple drop off. It's playing the Zalugs and the Yatas as well. So the game plan of this deck is very similar to the game plan of a lot of modern Yata decks, where you're trying to deprive your opponent of resources in hand and potentially set up the Yata lock. But even if you don't set up the Yata lock, you're depriving them of enough resources to get in and kill them with damage. You've got the Gemini Elves, you've got the Kaiku, and you've got just a bunch of monsters that float. You've got Tomatoes, you've got Sangan Witch, etc. You've also got Fiber Sharp. So this is basically putting a lot of the good cards in Yata format into one deck and running with it. Drop off is maybe a bit debatable there. And also, they're missing some very important cards like Painful Choice, for instance, which a lot of people in the modern day do play. It's pretty much a staple in modern day versions of the deck, although it is in the side. I'm not really sure what you'd side it in against, but I guess it's here in the side if you want it. There's also no second knock in the side, which is kind of interesting. Also, no ceasefire in the side. So, they don't really have the tools to deal with like flip focus strategies if they're, bringing that in. But they do have triple electric snake in the side here, which some people do play in modern Yata, some people don't. But it is for the hand control matchup here. They've also got exiled in the side, no rotas in the deck to tutor into your Zalugs and your exiled, which is something that a lot of modern versions of the deck do play. But all in all, this deck is very, very interesting from a historical perspective. I don't think it's a bad deck by any means. I'll show you some games with it that I have in a second, but I do think that compared to a lot of the innovation that's happened in modern day, this deck can be very much improved. And I think it has been improved by modern deck lists. This Heavy Storm here maybe shouldn't be in here. A lot of people have not really liked Heavy Storm in the modern day. The side deck could be tightened up. Pre-mat maybe doesn't see play here. The drop-offs probably shouldn't see play because while they can come up and be good, they can also be very bad. For instance, if your opponent draws in a Serpent, then you drop off, then that Serpent gets pitched, they add it back. Same with MST. If you drop off an MST, they just MST one of your other back row, and you kind of lose that value there. So drop off is a card that not many people are playing anymore because it's just too random, and it's random one-for-one removal. It does deprive your opponent of resource in hand, so it's not bad, and you'll see it come up in some of the games that I've got with this deck. But all in all, it's not really good either. It's not really something that you'd want to put in a generic good stuff hand control based deck. So very interesting to see how this deck list used to be and how it will evolve now. So let's show a modern list as well, just to compare the two before diving into some games. Okay, so this is Barcode's winning list from the last Yata tournament event, and this is also a hand control deck. You're playing the Zalugs, you're playing the Reaper as well, which was not card played in the other deck there. But, Reaper is a very powerful tool to rip a card out of hand, also stall out a bit. You're leaning more into the Warrior package as well, playing Exiled in the main and also double Zambira. They're also playing Injection Fairy Lily, which I didn't even realize was not in the winning deck list. But this card is very, very good and should probably have seen play in that deck list. Also, double Magician of Faith instead of one. It's just slimming down a little bit. It's not in on the elves. It's using the Zambiras and things because that's searchable off Rhoda, and also can get over other things like Gravekeepers Spy, which is also seen sort of more experimentation in this format and more play in this format. Also, instead of playing things like Drop Off, they're playing Jar of Greed. Drop Off and Jar of Greed do something very similar. They both deprive the opponent of a resource. However, Jar of Greed Jar of Greed doesn't deprive the opponent of a resource, but basically what I'm saying is that it's a one-for-one card, right? Drop Off gets rid of one of your opponent's resources. Jar of Greed gains you one resource. So they do something very, very similar. However, Jar of Greed is a guaranteed resource for you, while Drop Offs is not. Also, Jar of Greed gets you into your game plan more. It's generally better for you to see cards and, use those cards to control your opponent's hand than for you to just randomly hit something from your opponent's hand. So I do think that this is a much, much cleaner list, a much, much more, just better list optimized. And also the side deck is a bit tighter as well. You get the double knock in the side to deal with more flip focus strategies. You've got the heavy storm here as well. You don't need it in the main because it rarely comes up, except in certain matches where you'd want to bring it in. You're also playing multiple TTs as well, which wasn't really played in the winning deck list. So, I think there's a lot of stuff here. Spies as well. Even a text 4-star Ladybug of Doom. I do think that you do occasionally see like weird tech cards like this in modern deck lists more often than old ones, which may sound weird. Old deck lists definitely have their fair share of spice as well. But as these metagames shift and warp, everyone's trying to look for the next big tech. And so occasionally you just see very strange choices in the side deck. Not that I'm saying 4-star Ladybug is terrible. It's just definitely a strange choice given what we know about the format now. But anyways, I think that, comparing the modern deck list here with the older deck list there, I think you can see a lot of different sort of deck building principles colliding. This deck is a tight 40 card, even though they could have potentially added a 41st with like a third Jar of Greed if they wanted to. So, you're seeing tighter deck lists here. You're seeing cards that are generally like more powerful and synergistic with each other. For instance, the winning deck list was not on the Rotas. I think Rota is a card that you probably should put in Yata deck lists if you are going for just a good stuff build, because it tutors into your Zaluk and your Exiled, so it gives you flexibility there. Also, if you go for Zambira, tutors into that as well. So very, very powerful card in this format. And I do think this list is just much, much tighter, much, much cleaner. And you can tell that by like the lower monster count. Every card in here feels like it's here for a distinct reason. And you could argue the same for the other hand control list, but there were definitely some cards that just seemed like they were thrown in there because they were, pretty good in the strategy, but it felt like a bunch of things were sort of colliding at once. It didn't really feel like a cohesive whole, it just felt like a pile of good cards, really. And here it feels more like a cohesive whole. That's just my opinion on it, though. Maybe I'm just reaching too hard for a conclusion about these deck lists. Maybe, the passive time does not actually change as much as we think about these deck lists. And, maybe I'm just trying to make a video off that. But I do think that there is something here in that as modern lists get more and more iterated upon, they do become more and more optimal, and they sort of clean out sort of the awkward stuff of the older deck list. So that would be my general trend for these sorts of deck building things, especially in the DM era. I'm using Yata for an example because that was the first time when you actually really had access to a bunch of decks playing in a major event at a very high level. Before that, there were mainly just locals and things like that, and a lot of the deck lists weren't really well preserved, and also a lot of the deck lists were a lot worse because, locals, on a locals level, you're not really going to get a high level of competitive play. I mean, you can have competitive locals, don't get me wrong, but what I'm saying is like, compared to a Worlds event, a deck that wins a Worlds event is going to probably be a lot better than a deck that wins a local event on average. So, generally, if you're going before Yata, you don't really have the best net decks to pull from if you're going for the older versions of these events. And that can sort of be applied to modern versions as well for smaller formats. For instance, like Imperial format, which we just wrapped up a tournament in on the YGO from Zero Discord server, which, you should definitely join if you want to play games in this format or any of the others on my channel, and also participate in future tournaments. In that format, that was a very small tournament. That was like 19 people. And I do think that a lot of those people are very competitive in the retro scene, and they bring a lot of modern ideas to that format. But when you get a tournament that's small, it kind of is like a locals. It's not something like, for modern examples, a PWCQ or an RBT for Goat and Edison, where they're getting a ton of people playing in one thing. So if you do manage to win that event, you've gone through a heck of a grind, and you've managed to really prove that your deck has what it takes, to get into the top cut of the Imperial format tournament. And I'm not trying to, say that isn't like hard, because it definitely is hard, and it definitely is an accomplishment, don't get me wrong. But to get into that, you basically had to go like 4-1 or 3-2 and have a good record in the Swiss, and that's like 5 games that you're playing. Not really comparable to the broader tournaments that you get with much longer records that you have to go for. So, by just necessity of not being able to filter out more, you potentially get less optimal deck lists winning. And I'm not saying that any of the deck lists that won were less optimal, but what I am saying is that if we had a tournament of like 100 people, right, that would probably have even better deck list topping. And maybe the deck lists at the top would be the same, but you would have just a general higher quality of deck lists in the event at the top tables, at least. So I didn't mean to ramble on too long about this. This is meant to be more of like a discussion video, even though I am going to show off a bunch of gameplay. But I do think that that is the general trend of decks from around this time. Now, maybe I will revisit this topic in the future because I do think that these general deck list trends do change, especially as players get more sort of knowledgeable about the theory of the game. I think that oftentimes in later formats of the game's history, a lot of the decks that you see are like pretty optimal from a theoretical level. But what changes in those formats is that new strategies and decks are discovered. And so when those decks are discovered, then existing decks have to sort of adapt for those now. And so you sort of see deck tech that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise. And you kind of see that in Yata a little bit. You know, for instance, Gravekeepers Spy, not really the most played card back in the time when the 2003 World Championship was being held. But nowadays in the Yata format, it is very popular. So that's why something like Zimbira can see more play, or why these Nox are here. You know, so I do think that as time goes on and new decks are discovered in later formats, then that necessarily shifts the sort of way those decks are constructed there. But I do think in the DM era, where there's a lot less new decks to discover. I'm not saying there are no new decks to discover. I mean, as you've seen in Yata format, there definitely are some with Gravekeepers, and also whatever Alafia 2 pilots to any given tournament top. You know, I do think that there are less variations that you can pull from that, and so a lot of the things that you'll find will be the same in a modern deck list. It's just that the theory was not quite there, and a lot of the theory can lead to sort of unoptimal decisions like the 41 card deck and the drop-offs, and that could potentially make or break a modern deck versus an older deck. But, you know, I'm talking about all this in theory. Let's get into it in practice, and let's dive into some games. Okay, we're playing the winning deck list from August 2003, and we're facing Colgate, who's playing a modern deck list. And we start off with an intense rock, paper, scissors here. And it is, yeah, I mean, it's just intense. We go like 7 times, I think, before we actually, you know, manage to break the tie. Unfortunately, Colgate does indeed break the tie, so we will be going second here, which has been unfortunate. You generally want to go first in these formats to, you know, potentially hand rip your opponent. And, I mean, this is a good hand. We've got Fiber Jar for a couple different options here. We got Forceful to shuffle things back if they don't rip it out of our hand. And we got Dawn to go for a more aggressive play. They're going to start out with a Graceful, though. That's pretty good for them. They pitch 2 Gravekeepers, so this reveals that they are on a Gravekeeper strategy. Now, there are many different ways to build it, and this is a deck that's sort of arisen in the modern day. This sort of gets back into, like, you know, if we were playing this deck and it had been adapted to tournaments that had been held in Yata previously, then maybe it would have a plan in the side deck for Gravekeepers. As is, there's no real plan for it in the side, so that might make games 2 and 3 a bit harder, but we're going to start off with a Forceful Sentry here, because we're not really going to try and hit into that set, so we don't really feel the need to save this for after we attack in. So we see their hand, we see that they're on Tribute, Gravekeeper's Assailant, Book of Moon, and Ring of Destruction. That's a bit tricky. So what I'm thinking here is that the set is very likely Gravekeeper's Spy, because, you know, they filtered through their deck with the Charity, they set a card, so it's either going to be Guard or Spy. If it's Spy, then that's the worst case scenario for us, so we better play around that. But we're going to send back the book there, and we leave them with the Ring, Assailant, and Tribute. So they don't have Necro Valley, so Tribute isn't live here, and they don't have Necro Valley, so Assailant isn't 2k. So we do have a couple potential options here. We're going to go for the Zalug and go for Change to rip another card out of their hand. So we float the Spy, and it is indeed the Spy there. So we're just going to try and rip in 426, try and hit something good. If they, you know, keep the Assailant, we can always call back the Zalug after it's been destroyed by battle, but we do hit the Assailant. So we also prevent them from getting another monster on field. So I do think the Change of Heart was worth it there, even though it was a little bit aggressive. So we're going to give them back the Spy, pass back to them. They're going to set 2, switch the Spy to defense, pass back to us. We draw Raigeki. That is really good. We're just going to fire that Raigeki, and hits another Spy. We're going to bring out a Tomato as well, getting a little bit greedy, but I figure that we've got the call to bring back the Dawn and then rip that last card out of hand if we want to. We decide not to, though. I think we could have just gone for it, but realistically, like, they've got Ring set and they've got Tribute in hand. We don't really care about that as much, so we might as well just save it for if they're trying to get aggressive here. But they're just going to pass back to us. We draw MST here, so that is perfect. This rewards our patience with the call. We're going to MST that set Ring, then go for the call on the Dawn, and we're going to attack in for 14, rip a card out of their hand. So we will hit the Tribute. Okay, so that's good to know that that's gone, but we would have liked to have hit the other card in case it was more live. We're going to keep the Fiber Jar in hand because I think we're in a really, really good spot, and we can save the Fiber Jar for later. Now, if they have another Tribute and a Necro Valley in hand, then we can get punished for this play, but I do think that it's fine just saving it while we're in dominant position. We draw Graceful Charity here. We're going to go for that. Just try and see if we can wrap this game up. We draw Drop Off, MST, and a Tomato. And we got to think about exactly what we want to do here. I think what we actually want to do is we're just going to send the Tomato and the MST. We want the Fiber Jar for a disastrous situation. And we keep the Drop Off because they're on very low life. They've got MST, though, for our call. So main 2, we're just going to set the Fiber, set the Drop Off, pass back to them. They draw, we drop off that draw, and they just pass back to us. So we've got Fiber either way. So the Drop Off really didn't matter too much, probably. But I still think it was worth setting. And we're going to flip that Fiber Jar, reshuffle everything back in. Now we get to hit in here for some damage. And so we're going to feel pretty good about that. So after everything gets shuffled back in, that's always the fun part about Fiber Jar, is just, reshuffling everything back in. Luckily, there is a macro for it on DB. But in the replays, you kind of got to just click through all the next plays. So, while we're shuffling back everything here, if you enjoy this sort of content, please do subscribe to the channel. It really does help out a lot. And we're trying to reach 1,300 subscribers by the end of the month, and we are almost there. So your support can definitely get us there. And also leave a like down below. Comment what you think of these games and what my general thesis on these sort of old deck lists versus the modern deck lists are. We're going to go for a copy here, though. See their hand. And we see that they've got a Ring, Necro Valley, MST, Spy, and Terraforming. Now, if we take the Necro Valley, the Terraforming doesn't really matter because they've got another Necro Valley. So we're not going to go for that. The Spy is very annoying. We could take the Spy, and that might indeed be what we do. But the Ring is also kind of rough. But then again, if we're just sitting on the Sanga and attacking in, then the Ring isn't that bad. But then again, like, if they set the Spy, we've got knock for it. So we want to get value off that knock. So I think, honestly, in hindsight, I probably should have taken the Spy. That would have been probably the better move, just cutting them off of that play. Because they don't necessarily have to set the Spy here. And so I don't necessarily want to allow them to do that. And then I can save the knock for another monster here. And again, we've got Sangan. If they ring the Sangan, we both take 1,000 and get a search. So that's really good for us here. And if they don't ring the Sangan, we can distribute over it for Jinzo. So I think that, honestly, like, taking away the Spy would have been the better play here. But I misplay, and I take the Ring. I don't think the Ring's a bad choice because, this does cut them off of a key piece for removal. If they set the Spy, we knock it, and then we're in a really, really good spot. But it does sort of telegraph that we do have the knock, or just a way to deal with this. So they're going to go for Terraforming for another Necro Valley, get that deck thinning, and get a sort of redundant copy in hand in case we clear it. And then they're going to make the smart play, and they're going to summon out that Spy, attack over the Sangan. Now, we can Sangan something that could potentially get us out of this situation, but unfortunately, we can't get a Fiber Jar because Fiber Jar can't shuffle back things from the graveyard while Necro Valley is on field. So Fiber Jar is shut off by that. And we've got to think about exactly what we're going for here. We go for a Tomato. And this is also sort of another misestimation on my part. I think at the time when I got rid of the Ring, I was thinking, well, if they clear the Sangan, we can get back Fiber Jar. But that does not work here. So unfortunately, they're just going to set one pass back to us. Now we know it isn't Ring, but we're just going to set a Tomato, a Mirror Force, and a Reborn, trying to bait out that MST on the Reborn because Reborn is dead to us now. They're going to MST the Mirror Force, though, so they do hit that correctly. And now we're in kind of a tough spot. They're going to hit over our Tomato here. We bring out a Witch, so now we contribute over that Witch for the Jinzo here, attack over the Spy, which is a pretty good place to be in. And that is indeed what we do. We get to search. So ultimately, this still worked out for us. I do think, though, that we did misplay a bit, though. So we're going to attack over that Spy there. And they're going to book down the Spy, so we get a bit punished here. Because we take 100, they get out another monster here. They can get out Assailant, which can deal with our Jinzo. So it's not looking good for us. And we're just going to set the knock, fire a Mirage here. So that way we can hopefully draw into a way to out this. But, yeah, we do draw MST, so that does deal with that. They could just MST the Mirage, but they're choosing... Oh, no, they MST our Mirror Force. They don't have the MST anymore. So this is pretty good for us. They're going to go for Forceful. Shovel back the Serpent. I think shoveling back the MST probably would have been a little bit better, because then they don't let us keep the Mirage. I guess Serpent's annoying, but, I don't know. I don't know. Oh, they're going to go for Yata. But again, yeah, Serpent stops the Yata lock, true. But, actually, it doesn't really because you just hit over it with Assailant and then attack in. So I think it was actually a bit of a misplay. I think we would have lost if they had sent back the MST because our Mirror Force is already gone. We could be on, Saku's and stuff, so that is something to consider. But you got the Spy for a redundant Saku here. So, yeah, I think that this was actually a major misplay on my opponent's part. And they probably weren't considering the Mirror Force in the graveyard. But yeah, sending back the MST actually does just win them the game. Because then they Yata lock us. And, I mean, I guess we're drawing every turn off Mirage. So we still have that. But, if our MST's gone, we don't have a way to out it. So we're just in a really awkward spot. And we just sort of keep bleeding cards. So yeah, I think if they had sent back the MST, we would have lost here. But then again, we misplayed, sending the ring instead of the spy. So, it sort of cuts both ways. And we go for MST on the Necro because now we actually have an opportunity to go for a reborn play on the Jinzo, attack over that assailant. And we're in a really, really good spot here. They do have the Necro Valley again, but I feel like this is still a good spot to be in. So we get to draw 4 off the Mirage here, and we draw Fiber Jar, Drop Off, Tomato, and Geki. Those are pretty good. We are at potential risk of deck out. They're going to go for Tribute here, getting those cards out of our hand, and they're just going to pass back to us. So we do lose everything in hand off Mirage there, and we just pass back to them because nothing we can do here. We draw 4 off the Mirage. We draw the Serpent, which is very nice because we want that for sort of insulation. They go for Coffee here, and they rip a card out of our hand. They're going to rip the Zalug. That's fine by us. They pass back to us. We draw Duo, but that's going to not really do anything here. We do get back the Serpent, though, so that's pretty good. But we choose not to because we want to draw more off the Mirage. So we will draw 4, and we draw another MST. Oh, yeah, this was at the time when you had 3 MST, so yeah. So that makes sense. They probably thought we had another MST set. So, yeah. Never mind. I take back the misplay allegations because, I've been playing formats where MST is limited a bit too much, but I forgot that in Yata it is unlimited. So please forgive me for that. I MSTR Mirage. I go for the heavy here, and I bring out an elf, and this should be the end of the game. So yeah, that will be all she wrote there. So very good stuff. And I do think that, again, it does show the deck can win, but game 2, you might see some of the flaws of it because we don't really have a side deck plan for this deck. The books are bad. The Parshath is bad. The snakes are bad. Like pretty much everything in our side deck is not teched out to beat this deck. So we are in a bit of a tough spot if they actually get their engine online and can really stymie us here. They go for terraforming here, adding back a Necro Valley, and they're going to set 1, fire Necro Valley, set another, pass back to us. I really wish we had the second knock on the side. We would have brought that in, but unfortunately we just got the 1 in the main. So we're just going to set the Fiber Jar and set 2, pass back to them. Now the reason I do this is because what I'm planning for is they're going to flip up a spy because I basically know it's a spy, right? Based on them filtering through the charity. So they're going to flip up spy, bring out Spear Soldier. They're going to attack into our set. We can MST the Necro Valley on attack declaration, and then the Fire Jar will be able to resolve, and we shuffle everything back because I don't think we can really deal with a resolve spy and a Necro Valley on board. So we just better shuffle everything back. We're going to take 1,000, but I do think it is worth it. They're going to go for the spy here, and they're going to get a Spear Soldier indeed. And then they are going to go, they're going to think a bit about this, and they're going to go for an MST on our MST, and that's really unfortunate because we really did want that MST for the sort of attack declaration, because now if they've got a Necro Valley, they can just fire it, and now our Fiber Jar is shut off. So unfortunately, they called the 50-50 right, and we weren't able to pull off this play. I mean, even if we'd pulled off this play, they would have gotten in 1,000 damage. So, it's not the best thing for us in the world, but it is probably the best outcome that we had here. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out that way. We just bring out the elf attack into the spy. Unfortunately, they do have a Book of Moon, so this will trigger the spy yet again. And yeah, it's looking bad for us. I mean, no matter what here, this was going to be a bad spot for us to be in, but I think we do just lose the game on board. So they are going to think about this a bit. Bring out a witch, and yeah, that's just all she wrote because this is more than enough damage to kill us here. And so that will be the end of the game. So again, not having the side deck plan for this strategy really does hurt this deck, and that's one of the flaws with the older deck list that I did mention in the first part of this video, but we can still definitely win here. Definitely not out of the question. I mean, this deck is not terrible, it's just not optimal. So, and hopefully these games have shown you that. Like game 1, I'm not necessarily sure we had all the optimal cards there, but I do think that the deck is good. You can win with it. It's just not going to necessarily get you the most games here. We go for drop off, hit a terraforming, and this is again sort of the flaw with drop off. Didn't necessarily guaranteed trade profitably with what your opponent's getting. There's an argument that we saved the drop off for once we've got our hand looping action in place. So we could have potentially done that, but I figure a drop off now versus drop off later is still the same 1-for-1 trade. So you should just probably do it as early as possible. But they're going to go for double terraforming here, so that third terraforming might have been dead, depending on if they're playing 3 Necro Valleys or just 2. But now they've got those Necro Valleys. They go for a guard here, go for a Necro Valley as well, attack in for 15 here. There's a bit of a risky play on their part, but I figure this means that they've got a Book of Moon in the back row there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go for the Harpies. They do indeed have the book to set down that guard there. We go for pot now to draw 2, just see what options we have for that guard. And we're going to go for the Dark Hole to clear that away. So that way we can get in with the Zalug, rip them down to 1 card in hand. And now they're in a bit of a tough spot. We hit another Necro Valley, and, you know, they just discarded of their own free will, which means that they do have another Necro Valley in hand. I mean, that's what that means, right? Unless they were cheating, which I know Colgate would not cheat. So, you know, that is another Necro Valley in hand, which is good to know about. It will shut off our Fiber Jar here. And they've got an Assailant here as well. We're just going to TT that to get rid of that. We draw a Zalug, but we don't necessarily want to mill for our opponent here. So we're just going to go for an Elf, attack in for 19. It's the biggest monster we've got. And they're just going to pass back to us. We draw a Snatch Steal, so it's looking like this game is wrapped up a little bit. We're just going to bring out this Kaiku, get in for 3,700, and drop them down to 1,000 damage. Now, there's not really much they can do from this position. If they set a Spy, that's annoying for us. But we do have Snatch to take one of the cards that they bring out there. And if they bring out like an Assailant, then, you know, we can sort of get over the Spy that way. But we're just going to attack in to the set in case like Morphing Jar. We set the Zalug and the Snatch Steal first. Unfortunately, it is indeed the Spy. So they are going to get out an Assailant here. And that's perfect for us because the Assailant can indeed clear that Spy. So that's exactly what we wanted here. And they're going to attack into the Kaiku here. Deal with that. And then main 2, they're going to set 1 pass back to us. We draw MST. So we might want to go for the MST first on the back row. But we're going to go for the Snatch first. Because I figure if it's book, they're going to book down one of their monsters anyways. And so it's not really the best to do that. I might as well go for the Snatch on their Assailant there, and then if they do book, we can save the MST for the Necro Valley. But it looks like that will indeed go through. We're going to attack in to the Spy. They've got Mirror Force. Okay, so that will also deal with that. Maybe I should have just MST'd beforehand, but I think we're still in a good enough spot that we're fine. We're going to set the Fiber Jar here. Again, we can go for the MST Necro Valley play, but this time they've got 2 Necros in grave, so we know that this will be able to go through, even if they've got removal for our MST. They're going to go for the Graceful Charity here, pitching double Electric Snake. Again, that is sometimes something that people play against this hand control deck. So, very funny stuff. Unfortunately, we didn't get to pull that off. But they're going to go for Mirage here. Set 1. Pass back to us. And this is perfectly fine because we can just MST that Necro Valley there. If they had like IO or something to stop the MST, we were still fine because that will shut off the Necro Valley as well. So either way, we've got the Fiber Jar here to resolve. And this should be the end of the game. As long as we draw a monster with 1,000 or more attack, we will be winning this one. And that is very, very likely. So we're just going to, you know, sort of fast forward through this Fiber Jar activation here. But again, I hope that this does show that the deck can indeed win, even against deck that doesn't necessarily have, you know, a game plan for in the siding. I mean, you could argue that this deck was, you know, sort of more all-in build of Gravekeepers. Like, a lot of Gravekeepers decks, they're not playing the 3 Necro Valley. They don't really need it. And also, they're not necessarily going all in on the Gravekeepers themselves. But I do think it's cool to see experimentation with this deck beyond just the Alpha 2 list, because that was the list that won a tournament. And I think in the future, there could definitely be more there to explore. So I'm happy to see the experimentation. But again, you know, this deck can win against a deck. It's just, we did have a bit of a tough spot in games 2 and 3. So we go for Comfy to play around Karibo. It's very unlikely that they're on Karibo, but, you know, it is an option there. So we just send the pot, bring out the Sangan, and that should be the end of the game. And it will indeed be the end of the game there. So very, very cool stuff. So, you know, again, this does show that the deck can win against sort of decks that weren't around at the time, but it does have a bit of a tougher time as indicated in game 2. Let's dive into a game against a more typical hand control list to see how it does there. Okay, we got a game against Dump Truck here, another frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We're going to dive into the Rock, Paper, Scissors, and they will just instantly win that one. So, no long RPS game like we had last game, and that's a shame because this hand is really, really good going first. Luckily, our opponent doesn't have a hand rip to tear it apart, so a knock as well. Oh my goodness, this hand is busted. And they do not have the IO to shut off the pot, so wow, this is, I mean, this is very good. I mean, 41 card deck, you know, lots of consistency, never. We go for the Elf first, just summon that out in case they had TT for like a Sangan. So now we'll go for the Forceful Sentry here, shuffle back a card. We could have potentially gone for Comfy first as well, but I don't necessarily want to play in. Oh, actually, there's not really much I can play into here because we got Knock for the set. So yeah, we might as well just go for the Force. We'll see what they're working with there. And we think about exactly what to do here. We send back the Snatch Field. We don't have an MST for that. And we got some powerful monsters that we don't necessarily want to get taken. We just have to play around the Dark Hole and the Yata and the Faith. So I think we are in a good spot here. We go for the Knock to clear away that back row. We attack in with the Elf. They go for Ring on the Elf. And now that we've seen what they've got there, now we can go for the Comfy in main 2. And we're going to send them off because we don't necessarily want them getting back a powerful spell besides Dark Hole if they do draw another one. So we feel fine just playing around the Dark Hole. We're going to set the Reborn there. And even if they go for the Yata, oh, they got MST, so that's annoying. We would have liked that Reborn to stick around. But, you know, they used up the MST. Now we know their hand exactly. We aren't drawing here, but we do have the Serpent just to bring out. Serpent will sort of stymie the Yata Lock on its own. We'll get in for 3, pass back to our opponent. They are going to go for Dark Hole on the Serpent, just go for the Yata, trying to draw into a way to deal with the Serpent more permanently while setting up the lock here. But again, that Serpent will keep coming back. There's no reason why we'd ever set this Serpent because we do not want to play into knock here. And we're just going to attack in for 300 each turn because we might as well if we've got an attack already. They're going to go for Raigeki this time, clearing the Serpent, subbing out the Yata, just going all in on the lock. I don't necessarily think this is the wrong way to do it. It's definitely an option. And they definitely could have not gone for this as well, but while they've got the Yata in hand, they might as well go for it. They're just trying to get super aggressive here. Just keep us off drawing anything that can get us out of this Yata lock while they try and set up a way to deal with this Serpent more permanently. But they're going to get in for 500, set up the lock again. But now that they have, you know, used up a lot of their removal here, I am perfectly fine just summing out this Jinzo, accelerating the clock a little bit. This might have been a little bit of a mistake because they got removed for the Jinzo. That's very annoying. But I see that they don't have, you know, Change of Heart. They don't have Raigeki. They don't have Dark Hole. Snatch is really the big punish here. If they've got Snatch, then we lose. So maybe I should have just kept the Serpent on field. Or do they Snatch the Serpent? We lose anyways. So I think that, you know, just having the Jinzo out here is fine. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. We draw a Yata of our own. And now we can set up our Yata lock. So we feel very good about that. And we're just going to summon this Yata. They don't have any traps to stop this. And now they aren't drawing. So, you know, we feel very good about this. Not really sure what else they can do here. Even though they are adding back the Serpent, we know Serpent Yata in hand. Unless that set is something that can deal with this, then we do just win the game. It is Reborn, so that is something at least. They're going to bring out that Gemini Elf, set 1, pass back to us. Now we can't Yata lock them this turn, but what we can do is we can attack over that Gemini Elf, and then we can just attack over their set with the Serpent, because we know that the Serpent will clear it, whatever it is. Yata only has 100 defense, Serpent has 250 defense, so that is ultimately fine. We go for MST set here. They add back the Serpent. And they better hope that that last card is something they can deal with this. Unfortunately, it's just an MST, so that will be the end of the game. So, you know, very good stuff there, I think, for both players. And, you know, you could argue that potentially Dumpstruck could have done something differently there. Maybe they shouldn't have just gone all in on the Yata lock, but I do think that it was fine. I mean, we had Yata anyways to sort of get in to set up our own Yata lock on the following turn. Of course, they don't know this in hindsight, but I do think that just depriving us of cards for a turn, in a bunch of turns at that, is very valuable. So, you know, I think that it was fine to do that. Anyways, game 2, we are going second now, and this is a great hand. They're going to go for Duo here. They're going to rip away the Mirage Nightmare, and we're just going to pitch a Kaiku here. We could potentially pitch the Burial as well, but I figure Burial's a bit flexible. We don't want to lose any of our removal cards, so I'm fine just pitching the Kaiku here. And they're going to bring out an Elf, so Kaiku doesn't really do anything anyways. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw MST here. We're going to set that, pass back to them. They've got an MST for our MST. I figured we might as well save the Dark Hole for when they have more monsters on board, but they bring out Lily, accelerating the clock quite a bit. And again, this deck is not playing Lily, so that is good to know about. I think this deck probably should play Lily in the future because, you know, Lily is just such a powerful card. But, you know, they weren't playing it at the time. We're playing this deck from a historical standpoint. So, you know, it is what it is. We go for pot here, drawing 2. Luckily, we do have the Dark Hole to clear up that board. We are going to go for that. Then we're going to bring out an Elf of our own, attack in for 19. We could have also gone for a Witch here in case they've got, like, Change of Heart or Snatch, which prevents us from losing more of the time. But if they do have Change of Heart and Snatch, we're probably losing anyways because, you know, all they need is a monster for 1,600 or more attack, which is not that hard to find in this format. So I'm fine just going in with the Elf, setting 1, passing back. They've got Harpies for our set. They've got Geki to clear the Gemini Elf, and now they've got the Witch to get in for 11. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw drop off, which is pretty decent. We're going to set this Witch, set the drop off, pass back to our opponent. We're going to drop off that new draw there. We hit a Yata, so that's pretty good. But Yata doesn't really do anything here. So again, the drop off, you know, getting a card out of their hand, but it's not really doing much. So we're just going to set this MST, passing back to them. They bring out Zambira here. Now they will be able to get in for 1,100, but we do get a search here. So we got to think about exactly what to search. We're going to search a Gemini Elf here to get in for 1,900. They're going to attack in for 1,100, pass back to us, and we are just going to draw Heavy Storm. So not really the best here. We can MST their back row. It's another MST. We're going to Raigeki their cards there. If they're on Bazoo, then they can clear the Elf, but they're just going to get a Reaper, which we are fine with. We're going to bring out this Gemini Elf, attack in for 19, drop them down to 12. Now we're both at low life points. We set this Heavy Storm here as a bluff, and also potentially they'll set back row into it, and then we pass back to them. They go for Reborn here, target Zambira. Now Zambira will be able to get in for lethal damage with the Reaper if they do want to go for that, but if they do go for that, and we got Mirror Force, then they lose the game. So they're probably going to to do the more conservative play here, and they do indeed do that. And I do think that is correct because they are in a very, very good position here. You know, we've used up Raigeki and Dark Hole, so we don't really have the best way to clear this board. And while Zabira can't get in to attack directly next turn, you can just, you know, flip up the Reaper, switch the Zabira to defense, and go for that. So they draw, we go for drop off here. And it is a Call the Haunted, so glad to hit that. But, you know, maybe I should have saved the drop off for a bluff, but, you know, if we do that and they draw a card that kills us here, then we lose. And no matter what they do, they're going to flip up Reaper attack in. So, yeah, I think, you know, I think it's probably better if we are going for the bluff play to make like our first card is the Mirror Force that we were just saving for when they made to play with the Reaper because we can't clear the Reaper. So I think that's probably the better bluff than the new drop off because either way, if they draw a monster here, they're going to flip the Reaper and attack in for 3. So I don't really think it pays to hold the drop off, but they're going to switch to Zabira. I think that is the smart play there, but that will just be the end of the game. So we're going to go into game 3. And game 3, you know, I do think I misplay here a bit. So, you know, keep that in mind. I do think this deck definitely could have won this game 3, especially with its opening hand of the 3 hand rips. I mean, oh my goodness. But we go for Forceful here first, just in case they've got a Serpent. We see that they don't have a Serpent, so we're going to send back that Spy, deprive them of a monster there. And now we go for Duo. So now, knowing that they don't have a Serpent, we're fine doing this. We pitch 2, and then we go for Comfy to rip the last card out of hand. We see that they've got a Call and a Forceful now. What I'm thinking of is like, okay, they don't have any monsters, so Call is useless right now. So I'll leave them the Call, prevent them from ripping a card out of hand with Forceful. So that was my reading behind this, but I do think if we just sent the Call, summoned Kaiku, set Ring, we were winning that game like 9 times out of 10, right? Because if they bring out any monster to contest the Kaiku, we've got Ring for it. They can't bring it back, unlike if we give them Call. And I don't really think that there's another real situation where the Forceful really comes back to punish us because we do know about it. So I think that this was a major misplay here. I think that, you know, I shouldn't have done the Force, and also that should have gone to Grave. Yep, that did indeed go to Grave. We did catch it at the time. I bring out Kaiku, set the Ring, pass back to them. They bring out Gemini Elf here, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Now they've got the Call to bring this back. Even if we do ring it, we will indeed ring it just to sort of get it out of there. And now they've got the Call to bring it back, and I think that this definitely could have been our game if we had not done that. Let's say they forced the Zalug back. Yes, we wouldn't have another monster here to keep the aggressive pressure going, but we would have been able to get in for 1800 each turn. We got Mirror Force again to protect the Kaiku. I mean, we don't know what the next draw is, but we figure that them having no monsters and just kind of a useless Forceful, or maybe they use up the Forceful, is pretty good for us. So I feel like, you know, I really did misplay with what I sent there off the Comfy, and we do get punished for it. Now, we're not out of this game yet. We do set the Mirror Force here, pass back to them. They've got Destro, though, so that will clear the Mirror Force, and they'll attack over the Kaiku there. Clear that, and now we draw another Zalug, which is not going to be helpful here. We set the Zalug, pass back to them. They're going to attack over that with the Elf. That will indeed go through, and now they pass back to us. We draw Pots. That can potentially get us into summoning here. We draw Sanga and Tomato, which are both pretty good. Set the Tomato for the board presence, and pass back to them. They're going to go for a Pot of their own draw, too, and now they've sort of gotten back into this game. They go for Reborn here on our Dawn. Just to try and get a hand rip as well. But luckily we do have this Tomato here, so we can bring out another Tomato. And now we can get value off that Tomato next turn. They're going to think about this, and they're going to just pass back to us. We draw Book as well, so that's really good for us. We can potentially go for a really good play here. We're not playing a third Zalug in deck, which is a bit annoying. What we can do here is we can bring out this Zalug, attack over their Zalug, bring out a Witch here, book down their Gemini Elf, and attack over that with Witch, then get in for a hand rip with the Zalug. This does leave us a bit vulnerable to defense, but we had to deal with that Elf somehow. I do think this is probably the best way to do it because we rip a card out of hand. We rip a Snatchel, which is very good for us. They bring out a Tomato, though, so they can punish our Dawn play a bit. They attack into that Dawn, bring out another Tomato, and now we get a search off this Witch here. We're not playing Exiled in the deck, so, you know, we can't search out that. I mean, maybe I could have sided in, but I don't know. I want to preserve the historical flavor of the deck list, and I don't think that Exiled would be brought in against this deck. So we add back the Elf off the Witch there, and so we could just attack in with the Elf. I think that might be the better play, and that is indeed what we do. We just attack in with the Elf here. They have an option to get some powerful cards from deck. They're going to get a Sangam, which I think makes sense, and they're going to pass back to us. So they're going to bring out an Elf of their own, attack into our Elf. Those will crash. They'll attack in for 1,000 with the Sangam, and they'll just pass back to us. We draw an MST here, which is not really the most useful thing in the world. We could just summon out the Sangam, attack into their Sangam, but then they get a search if they get Yata, and that's annoying for us. We are lower on life points, so they do win the Yata Lock wars. So I just set the Sangam and set this MST pass. They're going to switch their Sangam defense, setting another pass back to us. Now, I have the read that that card is probably going to be a Magician of Faith or a Fiber Jar. I'm doing big 2003 mind here because I'm thinking like, okay, what's a card that they wouldn't want to summon into a set here? And what's a card that they would want to set instead? So I'm thinking, like, it's not a beater. So it could be, it can't, yeah, it could be a witch or tomato, in which case I'm fine attacking him with Sangan. It could be Fiber Jar or Moth or any of those sorts of cards. Either way, I'm fine attacking into those with Sangan. So I think about this quite a bit, and I do just decide to go for it here. I flip the Sangan, attack it in the set, figuring it might be a Fiber. Unfortunately, the Spy, and, you know, the power of Spy showing itself here, and getting out another Spy. So, again, it's something in modern decks that the old decks just weren't playing around, and I unfortunately fell into that trap there. We bring out an Elf here as well to protect ourselves because we are just dead on board if we don't bring in this Elf, but unfortunately they've got Geki either way. So, we were going to lose this one no matter what we did here. Because either way they'd have Raigeki, you know, clearing our entire board, and then summing out or switching the Spies to attack and getting in that way. But, you know, maybe they'll play around Mirror Force here. No, wait, they already know Mirror Force is gone. So, yeah, they can just get in for lethal here. And that Search That Fiber Jar is not going to help us. So, that will be the end of the game there. So, you know, very good stuff. Again, I think I definitely could have won this game, because if I had just sent the Call instead of the Forceful, we wouldn't have been in such an awkward position, and we would have had the aggressive pressure. So I really did let down the deck in this game 3 here, but I also think that this deck is not perfect. I mean, you've seen it over the course of these games. There'd be times when I'd want to search out like Exiled or Lily, and I can't do that off Witcher Sangan because this deck just isn't playing them. You know, also, it's not really prepared for the Gravekeepers Spies that are now being played more. It doesn't have the second knock in the sort of main or side. So, you know, I do think that this is a bit of an awkward build. It's very good in the sense that it can definitely win games. I'm not saying it's like unplayable, because it definitely isn't. Like, it can win you games, but I do think it's just very unoptimized. And compared to a lot of the more modern decks in the format, if you bring it to a tournament, you probably aren't going to win against those. But I do think that, you know, it's not unplayable. That's the main thing I want to emphasize. While I do think that modern deck lists are generally better to pull from than the historical deck lists, you know, those deck lists often did win events for reasons, and they're not going to be unplayable, right? They're going to be somewhat decent if you bring it in, but you've always got to adapt it to the modern metagame, adapt it to sort of new theory that's gone on, maybe put the painful in the main, you know, things like that. And I do think that, you know, whenever you're taking a deck list, whether old or modern, you've always got to be careful in how you adapt it to the modern metagame. Now, that being said, there are also some spicy historical deck lists that are just very, very different from the standard sort of like, well, it's an attempt at good stuff, but it makes some suboptimal plays. So let's dive into one of those and see what that looks like. This is the deck that managed to win 3rd place at the 2003 Worlds event, and I mean, it is something here. I mean, you see the Guardian Sphinx there, you see the Goblin Attack Force, Magic Cylinder. I mean, there's a lot going on in this deck that was piloted by Mike Rosenberg here. And it's very interesting. I can definitely see sort of the idea behind it. You know, you're getting tempo off things like Sphinx and getting in for damage, and it's just a very aggressive deck. You've got the attack forces and the Spear Dragons to get in for more damage as well. Spear Dragon also hits over things like Reaper, and, you know, even things like Tomato or Witch or Sangan, it can get in for some damage there. It also hits over Serpent, which is very good as well. You know, this deck is playing Magic Cylinder and the like to protect your monster that switches to defense there, and if you protect them for a turn, then you can tribute them out for a Sphinx or a Jinzo. And you've got them among us as well to get tribute fodder and decked in. Spirit Reaper is very annoying to deal with, and so I definitely see the idea here. However, this is like, I mean, I don't think that it's a hot take to say that this list is not really up to modern standards, right? Like, this list it really feels like a hodgepodge of a bunch of different cards, and of course, in the hands of a skilled player, it can do very well. And I think that Mike Rosenberg must have been a very skilled player to get 3rd place with this list here. And I do think it's always good to sort of look at it and be like, well, okay, you know, even if this list doesn't really appeal to my sensibilities, what is a potential reason why this deck list won, right? Is there stuff here that we can salvage for the modern metagame? And I think that honestly, the thing to salvage here is that like tempo decks can be very good. You know, if you have a deck that can get aggressive and set up good tempo, then it can win. I mean, we saw that with Alethea 2's sort of Germ Burn list that was playing the Spear Dragons as well as Giant Germs, which could replace the Momongas and things like that. So I do think that, you know, that deck is kind of similar to this deck in theory, but I also think that this deck is far worse. Like Guardian Sphinx, not worth playing in my opinion, doesn't really do much. But, you know, it's a very interesting deck list for sure. Also, only double MST with the Mirage is kind of interesting. Interesting choice for sure. Also, again, just the one knock, no second knock in main or side, no painful as well. This time, not even in the side deck there. So very interesting stuff. You know, side deck is also sort of a mixed bag. You've got a lot of things for hand control. You've got forced requisition, which, I mean, I don't necessarily know when this would get triggered because most of the time hand control is ripping cards out of your hand with like Zilug or Reaper. And that doesn't necessarily happen, but I guess this happens against a drop off. You can use it against a just Comfy or Duo. You can use it as well. So, you know, that's something. And it sort of, you know, fights fire with fire, I guess, a little bit. We've also got Trap of Board Eraser, which can, you know, for burn. Like, I mean, I don't know. This deck it's definitely a hodgepodge. It's somehow on the dust chute. So seeing a major meta shift like years before anyone else did there, but I think a lot of this deck is just not really up to par. But it is very spicy, and so I want to see how it actually does against a more modern deck. So let's dive into a game and see how it does. Okay, we got a game here against M Shobes, and we're gonna dive in. We did indeed win the rock paper scissors here. So this is a pretty decent opening hand. We can get the Sphinx online somewhat easily, I guess. We're just going to summon out the Witch, set a call, pass back to them. We don't want to play into like a knock or something. I feel like this is a pretty good board. They go for reasoning here. We go for 8 because we're not in Yata mindset. There's no Demock in this format, so we really should have called 6. 6 is probably the best pick here. But either way, it's a 2. So, you know, not really much we can do there. It seems like there's some sort of like Fiend reasoning deck. So very interesting stuff there. They go for reason, get out the germ, then they go for the pot to draw. And they're going to get a lodge in here, attack over our witch, get in for 7, and then get in for 1,000 here. And we got to think about exactly what to search. We are going to search out a Jinzo, though, because we've got ways to bring back the witch, tribute over it for Jinzo, and then get into their board here. So I feel pretty good about that scenario. Maybe we could even pitch a Guardian Sphinx here. But Guardian Sphinx is awkward because they just attack into it every turn with lodge in. Also, Guardian Sphinx is negated by Hades, which they likely are playing if they're playing Fiend Reasoning. They don't necessarily want to go for that. So we are going to go for call on the witch here, and then we're going to tribute over that witch for a Jinzo. The reason we go for call on the witch instead of reborn on the witch is because I want reborn to bring back a monster from their graveyard. Maybe this is actually a misplay because if their main boss monster is Hades, then that's not really that good because Hades can't be revived from grave. Maybe I should have gone reborn on the witch and then saved the call for the Jinzo later. But also there are ways to shut that off. Like if they've got MST for the call, you know, then we can't necessarily use call exactly when we want to. So I figure it's fine just using the call that way. And we attack over the lodge in there, not wanting to play into the germ. If they attack their germ into our Jinzo next turn, that's a bit annoying. But if they don't, then we get Exiled Force to deal with that. So I feel fine about that ultimately. They go for reading here. Again, we call 8. We again misplay there, but they bring out another germ. So I'm honestly okay with that. And they're going to think about this a bit. They're going to go for painful here. And they are going to send Hades, Lesser Fiend, Raigeki, and Book. Of these, oh, that's a bit tricky. I think of these, we want to give them the Lesser Fiend, as that can do the least against our board here. Book can set down our Jinzo and potentially set up a play there. So I give them the Lesser. We do have to be careful with our Serpent now, but I think it's ultimately worth it. They go for Snatch on the Jinzo. We get the MST for that. And they are going to, apparently they missed lethal here because they actually did have an MST there. So actually this would have been lethal damage because they MST are set before going for this Snatch, and then they reborn something back to get in that last bit of damage. That's 44 plus, oh, but they have a normal summon. They could also just summon out the Serpent. So yeah, so they did indeed miss lethal there. So that is good to know about. But, you know, from our perspective, we don't necessarily know what's in hand. We're just going to bring in Exiled Pop, the Unknown, just in case it's like a jar or something that could be very good for them here. Unfortunately, it is the Serpent, so that's going to be very rough for us. But we can hit over this Germ here, get in for 14. We do lose 5, but I still feel like we're in a good position here. They bring out another Germ. We get Reborn for our Exiled if we do need it. And they go for Forceful, so that's going to be a bit rough because we wanted to keep the Reborn. I guess we could have set the Reborn. But if they did have MST, then we'd lose the Reborn either way. They go for Reborn on our Exiled, use Exiled to pop the Jinzo there, and now we're in a bit of a tougher spot. They get in for 2,000. We know about the Lesser in hand, so we can't necessarily commit the Serpent to field. But we could, oh well, Mirror Force actually allows us to commit the Serpent to field. So we're going to go for Goblin just to get in more damage here. I think this was a bit of a mistake. We could have gone for just set Serpent pass, because we have the Mirror Force to back it up. But we're going to set the Mirror Force now. I guess this plays around MST a little bit better. They're going to add back that Serpent to hand there. They're going to bring out the Serpent. Serpent can hit over the Goblin Attack Force, but instead we're going to go for this Mirror Force. Wipe away the Serpent and the Germ. They're going to set another pass back death. We draw Io, which is really good. And we're going to think about exactly what to do here. We're going to bring out this Guardian Sphinx because I'm figuring I don't necessarily want to set it because, you know, if they've got ways to deal with the Sphinx, they've got ways to deal with the Sphinx either way. And we do know that their hand is just Lesser Fiend. So next turn, they're just going to bring out Serpent, likely. And I can always set down the Sphinx at the end of this turn anyways. And given that they only have Lesser Fiend and a Serpent in hand, I feel like we're in a good spot here. So I feel like I can test the back row with the Sphinx, get in for 17, and also prevent them from hitting over our Goblin Tech Force. They've got Ring for that, unfortunately. So we won't get any value off the Sphinx, but they would have used Ring if we'd flipped the Sphinx next turn anyways. So I think this ultimately worked out fine. So they're going to get in for 17 here. We are in a tough spot, though, now if they draw into a Lodgin. So that is a reason to potentially have set the Sphinx instead of attacking in. But I think we would have... So yeah, it would have bought us a turn if they draw Lodgin here. And they do draw Lodgin. So yeah, this was a bit of a rough one. I'm not really sure. I mean, okay, so... Yeah, I don't think we were winning this either way with that ring set, because if we had set the Sphinx, they summon out Lodge and attack into it and deal. They take 600, so they're down to, 4,100 total. They could ring the Sphinx to get rid of it. Then we drop down to 1,600. They've still got the Lodge. I guess we got Spear Dragon to hit over that. Then they summon out the Serpent to hit over the Spear Dragon. So, yeah, this was... I think we were still in a losing position here no matter what happened. But I think the Sphinx maybe would have been the better play, just to play around the top deck Lodgin plus Ring. But I figured, again, if they've got Ring, we probably lose the game there either way. But either way, still good stuff. And they could have had lethal in an earlier turn anyway, so we were losing that no matter what. So going into game 2, again, we don't really have a side deck plan for this sort of thing. But to be fair, I don't think any deck really has a side deck plan for the deck that M-Shobes is bringing here. Because, it's Fiend Reasoning, which is very interesting. And they're going to go for MST on our Mirage there. And they're going to go for a Painful here, sending a Serpent, a Forceful, an Earthbound Spirit, and a Lodgin. Now, this is sort of baiting us. It's saying, like, okay, I've got 3 Fiends engraved for Necrofear, and I've got the Serpent that I'm going to get back next turn. So, do you deprive me of Necrofear access, or do you give me the Serpent? So, that is a choice that we can make. But given our back row here, I'm honestly not too afraid if they bring out Necrofear at this point. So, I just give them the Serpent. Generally, if they send Serp plus some other cards, I think that Serp is the good pick to give them, because, even if they get Graceful there, they can just pitch whatever card they get anyways. So I do think that is the good thing to do. They go for a Dark Hole on our Sangin, which we are very happy about, because now we get a search off that Sangin, getting it out this Witch here, just to keep the resource train going. We could have potentially searched out something else, but I figured, not knowing what they've got, the Witch is the best thing to do, especially because we have this Reaper here that we can set and wall up a bit. So they're going to go for Reasoning. We call 6, because now we've realized the best thing to do there. They hit a Germ again. So, they do indeed get that out on field. They get out a Lodgin as well. Attack in for 2,800. We got to think here. We will ring the Germ. We don't want that being annoying in the future. And now they're going to attack in for 18 here. And that will go through. So we draw a Cylinder, which is really good here. We set the Reaper, set the Cylinder, pass back to our opponent. And they are going to think about this a bit. And they're going to add back the Serpent in standby, which, it's fine. It's technically main, but they haven't done anything in main yet, so I think it's fine doing that. They bring out a Hades here, which would have been really bad for us if we had had the Witch set, but as is, we just got the Reaper, so we can pass back to them. We draw Forceful, so we can send something back there, and we actually misplay here. We go for change. What I should have done here, what I should have gone for Forceful, send back the Serpent, and then I should have gotten in with Reaper that way. As is, I just attack in with the Reaper, and I think this actually might cost me the game here if we sort of look at the later turn to this game. I think that this was actually a major misplay on my part. The reason why I do this is because I want to get in a ton of damage right now. I figure I'll draw a way to deal with the Hades eventually, because we're playing an aggressive deck, and I do have this Cylinder here to bounce back a Hades attack, drop them down even lower to 1,800, which is a very, very killable spot to be in. So I figure that I want to cut them off completely of cards. Unfortunately, they do still have the Serpent there. So that really does backfire on us a little bit, because we didn't necessarily use our Forceful and our Reaper the best. And I think that if they hadn't had that Serpent, we actually probably would have won this game. Bit of a spoiler alert, we don't actually win this one. We go for the Cylinder here, so that way we're not taking a ton of damage. Driving them down to 18. They set a card. They pass back to us. We draw Exiled here, so now Exiled can deal with the Hades there. They've got Book on the... They're thinking about this. On the Hades. And now we go for Exiled on the Hades. Deal with that. And if they hadn't had the Serpent, they might not have had a card in hand. Yeah, they just drew a Hades for turn. So if they hadn't had the Serpent, they wouldn't have been able to bring up the Hades here. Our Witch play, we could have brought out Witch next turn, gotten in for another hand rip with Reaper there. I mean, did they draw a monster? Yeah, they drew Reborn, so they would have been able to bring out the Hades actually either way here. So, they are just going to bring out the Reborn here, though, to deal with our Reaper, though. And so they wouldn't have been able to deal with the Reaper easily. I think Hades is still a good thing to have there, just because they know we have the Witch, and it's a very annoying card for us to deal with. But as is, they just bring out the Hades as well, get in for 2450, and now we are in a very tough spot. Io will not do it for us. We're set the Io, set the Witch, because we just need to wall up. Witch won't get its effect, but Serpent plus Hades is just lethal. So they go for pot, and I actually don't Io this. That may seem really bizarre, but I can't afford to actually get Io up for a couple turns. So I'm saving Io for like the most impactful spell. Pot is very impactful, don't get me wrong. It draws them 2 cards, and maybe this was a misplay. Maybe I just got to keep them off cards. But what I want to do is I want to save Io for a game-winning spell. Now, that could be a mistake because they have the option to draw into more MSTs off the pot, which can then stop the Io. But I do think that it's fine doing this, and maybe that comes back to bite me later. But I think that it was fine to do. I actually misremember about whether they summoned or not here, but they did in fact not summon here. The Fire Jar would have been great if they didn't have the Hades on field, but as is, that Fire Jar just got to get set for chump block in here. They're going to attack in with the Hades, deal with the Fire Jar, attack in for 1,000 with the Germ, and this is probably just the end of the game. I mean, there are some like crazy draws that do it, but MST is not one of them. We're going to set that pass back to them. They just attack him for Hades, and that will indeed be the game. So again, I do think that if we had played the turn with the Reaper and the Hades correctly, we actually would have been able to win this game. I mean, it's always debatable, because, the Reborn was drawn there. But, if we had shuffled back the Serpent, maybe that would have been in the draw. And just depriving them of cards like that is very good. But, yeah, I do think that this deck is, again, like this deck can win games here and there, just like the last deck did. But this deck is also nowhere near as competent as that last deck. It's playing a lot of weird choices. It's doing interesting things, and it's not really adapted for the metagame of the format, in my opinion. But it is very interesting, and if you do want to play the spicy list, I do think there are some elements of it that can be adapted to the modern day, like with Alphitude's Germburn list from a previous Yata tournament. So, either way, very, very cool there. And I really enjoyed these games and also making this video. So, big shout out to my patrons for suggesting this video. And if you do join the Patreon, you'll be able to suggest video ideas like this if you're of the right tier. And also, you'll be able to even suggest exclusive videos that I can make for y'all as well, depending on what tier you join at. But no matter what level you join the Patreon at, you'll be able to be shouted out in these videos. So big shout outs to Tyler Compton, Dump Truck, GMYFS, Rinswin, Porkchop and Brendan Docker. It really means a lot that you all support me in this way. And your support definitely motivates me to make more videos like this. So if you want to suggest future video ideas, definitely go on over to the Patreon and join. And also, if you just want to support me, that's good too. And if you like videos like this, definitely subscribe. I've got more coming in the future, and maybe I'll revisit this sort of idea later on once we get into later eras of the game's history, once deck building theory has sort of caught up with what people were playing there. But I hope you all enjoyed as always. Let me know what you thought of the video down in the comments below. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero. I'm signing off.